Quiet on the set.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
The world we live in, aka pirates, it is fascinating, and it's so hard to pinpoint and just classify some of these things that are happening. When I was growing up, you would have a Transformers, and Transformers would be a toy line, and that toy line would basically go into irrelevancy, right? That did happen with the Generation 2 toys. The cartoons would fade away. With Transformers, you heard rumors of a Japanese series called Headmasters, and you would have to go to a comic book convention or some type of flea market excuse me, and you maybe would get lucky to buy some bootlegs, but in no way could you ever get the whole series. You would just get an episode here and there, 1 or 2 episodes at a time. Same thing happened with G.I. Joe, Thundercats. Heck, it even happened with Star Wars, where Star Wars in the 90s, and hopefully you guys see where I'm going with this. Star Wars in the 90s faded away, and we needed the special editions to come back and just give us a reason to re-explore that franchise. And from that point, excuse me, something similar happens with it's almost like a parallel where the Star Wars action figures came back, the Transformer toys got reissued, G.I. Joe went through a 25th anniversary reproduction of every single original character and then some. But then once they came back, they never went away. And then we get into the 2000s and the 2010s. I think it's highly significant that DreamWorks and they were DreamWorks at the time, they were rocking and rolling. The DreamWorks How to Train Your Dragon 2010. It's so significant. It's in that year because it makes it easy to track. It's not 2011, not 2012, not 2009. It's 2010, and the movie comes out. It makes $500 million. Now, here's the amazing thing. That's against the same budget that the live action movie has. Now we may have to do some inflation adjustments, but there might be a $10-15 million difference with or without inflation. So they spend a good chunk of change with this movie. They spend $165 million, but they get back $500 million, $500 million. And then we see something. We see this phenomenon that not a lot of people, we say a lot on this podcast, not a lot of people picked up on it. But we reached this moment where when something is popular, we have the tools to make sure it never goes away and it's always new. Never goes away and is always new. This is what DreamWorks figured out more than Disney, more than Pixar, more than any other company, more than Universal, more than Warner Brothers. Because 4 years later, from How to Train Your Dragon, we would get How to Train Your Dragon 2. 5 years after that, we would get How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World. 6 years from that, it's a live action remake, baby, that drops this weekend. 2027, How to Train Your Dragon 2, already announced. We would get a litany of short films distributed between networks, DVD releases, just incentives to purchase and to participate in the franchise. The Legend of the Bonekeeper Dragon, The Book of Dragons, Gift of the Night Fury 2011, Dawn of the Dragon Racers 2014, How to Train Your Dragon Homecoming 2019, How to Train Your Dragon Snaggle Tog Log 2019. And then here's the kicker. And DreamWorks has created this template. And we thought this template existed. But when we see it with a franchise that people really may not consider a major franchise, right? People do not look at How to Train Your Dragon the same way that they look at Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. But How to Train Your Dragon has been in your face since 2010. And if you're a kid and your parents are being shit parents and they're just putting you in front of the TV or giving you a tablet, an iPad to ogle over. DreamWorks Dragons 2012 to 2018, 6 solid years. DreamWorks Dragons Rescue Riders 2019-2022. This is a kids driven show meant for kindergarteners. DreamWorks Dragons The 9 Realms 2021 to 2023. We've had a play, live action play. We have a bunch of video games. Most recent, Dragons Legends of the 9 Realms 2022. We have soundtracks. This is considered one of an animated trilogy when we go back to the 2010. We'll talk about that movie. I'm putting this episode in front of How to Train Your Dragon 2010 for a reason. I feel like we have to remind ourselves that it's a franchise of entertainment. It's not a franchise of merchandise sales, but I'm sure merchandise sales are pretty well. But as of right now, there's no sentiment for the original How to Train Your Dragon action figures. I'm sure like Toothless or Focus Dragon. I'm sure some of his toys are up there, but there's no reverence for it. With every single movie that came out, there's not a stand out merchandising push. There's no 7-Eleven Slurpee cups or Happy Meals. I'm sure some of that stuff may have came out, but again, there's no resonance. But How to Train Your Dragon has been in the public lexicon and in the culture more than Lord of the Rings, right? Because we had Lord of the Rings, we had the Hobbit trilogy, and then the Rings of Power for Amazon is nothing but controversy. There's no continuous adulation outside of the Peter Jackson trilogy, the original. So what do we call this? And we're cycling back to the question I had in the beginning of this episode. What do we call this type of rollout? It's not driven by merchandise. It's driven by strict entertainment, building on top of itself, and giving us all these different lanes, or veins, right? All these different pathways to continue to explore and be a part of this universe. Let me get into this pushback, right? People will say everything's a remake and we don't get new. You always hear it. You heard it back in 2010. We don't get anything new. And DreamWorks, who really, I think, emerged as the preeminent animation company, in my view, more so than a Pixar. And Pixar, I get it. Pixar has had some hits. But How to Train Your Dragon, I mean, you can put that the success of this franchise alone against anything. I mean, you can put this against Toy Story. And that's tough to classify. But I think there's a true strength in the popularity of How to Train Your Dragon. There's a weird conversation happening online about this being a shot-for-shot remake of the original, on the top of everyone criticizing Lilo and Stitch for changing their ending for their live action. So it just seems like the critics, and I don't know, again, like, how do we even, I guess, like, part of the point of this episode is how do we classify the type of franchise that How to Train Your Dragon is? How do we classify exactly what happens within history for DreamWorks? And how do we classify the critics that clearly don't know what the heck they want or what's good and what's not good? Because the critics will tell you it's horrible that Lilo and Stitch changed their ending, and then Disney dropped comments like a day or two ago about continuing with all the live action remakes and updates, and they want to excuse me, as long as they find the right story to tell. So it's topsy-turvy, my AKAPADers, but that's a little bit what the Film Buff podcast is all about. Is sometimes it's really not about answering all the questions or having all the answers. It's really about what are the questions. Like, let's define what the questions are, and maybe from that point on we can have a starting point. Yeah, and I've recently been exploring this entire franchise, and I've just been loving it. I think when people give the criticism that we need new things, and then we kind of have a new fantasy franchise that came out of nowhere, to me, like, equal to Lord of the Rings. Yes, How to Train Your Dragon is equal to Lord of the Rings, because the lore, right? Like, it's a lot like Lilo and Stitch. The backstory and the lore is just so vast, and there's infinite possibilities. It just makes it exciting, and that's where How to Train Your Dragon is. We'll have future episodes where I touch on some of these aspects, but I was expecting just to on the weekend of How to Train Your Dragon, dropping a How to Train Your Dragon 2010 review / conversation, which is already recorded, but I had to bump that to talk about this. I feel like this episode should have came first. All right, and that's what she said. All right, AKAPADers, rock and roll. I love you.
Okay, that's a wrap.